Okay, for our second launch of the afternoon, we're going to be launching Small Acts of Purpose by E.A. Gleeson. In her third IP collection, Victorian author E.A. Gleeson casts her poetic eye as far afield as Belfast or as close to home as her own mortality. In an assured but always personal voice, she addresses the everyday, the exotic, and even the taboo with immersive detail, challenging the reader to reflect on the elemental issues of modern existence. E.A. Gleeson writes poems, essays, and funeral ceremonies. Throughout the past 2 decades, her poems have been published in Australia, Ireland, and the USA. Many of them have been placed in national and international awards. Her first poetry book, In Between the Dancing, received the 2008 IP Pix Award for Best New Manuscript. Her second collection, Maisie and the Black Hat Band, was commended in the 2012 IP Pix Poetry Awards. Please welcome Anne Gleeson.
Thank you, David. So there are 3 reasons that I'm very grateful to Interactive Press. But I'm going to start my reading today with a poem on Belfast. As David just mentioned, I grew up a good Catholic girl in the Western District of Victoria, and the people who were called Protestants lived their lives pretty similarly to us. So I was astonished by what happened in Belfast. This is the first poem in the collection, Belfast in My Mind. Belfast formed in my mind from newspapers spread across our green Laminex table, burning cars, uniformed soldiers, smashed windows, balaclavas, rubble and streets full of people just like us. I could see children walking to school, not knowing that around the corner a gunman squatted nursing his rifle. I wanted to stop them, to yell at them, to tell them to go by a different route. But by the time that photo lay open in our kitchen, the children had walked. I would never hear if they had made it to school. I wanted to know what happened to that picket line of women who were standing arm in arm across Halls Road when the bus backed. But next day and the next, there were new stories to tell. Women who looked like neighbours opening their bags to be searched, and men in suits lying on the ground, soldier souls holding them down. What did they talk about at tea that night? Did they get home for tea that night? News reports tumbled from the radio. Names like Bobby Sands, Bernadette Devlin, Ian Paisley, as recognisable as decades of the Rosary. Belfast roads, Falls, Malone, Shankill, Springfield, embedded into my geographical lexicon. Though we weren't there, we took it in. Our world view forming, smells of burning rubber, roof beams, gunshot, and images of girls, miniskirts and bobby socks flirting behind burnt-out buses and barbed wire barriers. While at Mass, we were led in prayers for reconciliation between Catholics and Protestants. The concept more difficult to understand than the concept of transubstantiation. The second poem I'm going to read is from the Belfast section. It's the last poem in that section. I'm sure that many of you spent agonising time listening to what was happening as the most powerful men in our world started to amass warships, and the threat that continues for so many people. Perhaps you're not people who lie awake at night like me, you're probably much more sensible, but I tend to think about these things at night. However, Radio Ulster. My bedroom is turning ugly. Fear filters through the fine wires of my earphones. Under despair-tangled sheets, the ABC reports men mad for the massing of military and others keen for the clout of terror, bombing their own, while closer to home, they're barricading refugees somewhere else. I switch hemispheres and look for company on Radio Ulster, where you're telling me, Rosie, about this place where you found your space under the M3 flyover. You love the solitary action where your board scoops the bowl and steadied by traction, confidence building, you flip and stamp, fling your board up the ramp and soar along the ledge. A toss, a twirl and poly wheels gripping tight as you unfurl to hurl yourself for one last flight before it's time to head home for tea. Who would have thought of the BBC introducing you, Rosie, to me? You wonder what you would do without your skateboard, and tonight I wonder what I would do without you. I'm moving to another section. I know there's quite a few poets in the room, quite a few writers and poets in the room, many of whom have published with Interactive Press. So David, this is actually a thank you for you, this little section. David has published 3 of my poetry books and I've always been grateful to he and the different staff members who have helped. You know, sometimes I'll be sitting down in Victoria and I'll get something back and I think, how embarrassing, fancy sending that through. So that happened a few times. However, I think the covers of the last group of books are astonishingly beautiful, and I'm thinking of Basil's and Liz's that are over there, really special covers. But a good cover does not come easily. And I'm very happy with my 3 covers, but I want to tell you how you should, if you're thinking of going with Interactive Press, here are some tips, or any other publishing company. Guidelines for publishing a poetry book. There are 4 steps in publishing a poetry book. It is recommended that you complete the steps in the order in which they are listed. Step 1. Before you begin to write any poems, select a cover. If you look through the raft of popular image provider sites, you can save yourself a lot of trouble. Rather than ending up with a beautiful painting that conveys something of the mystery and rawness of life, or the elegance of a standard font on a slightly textured plain surface, or a striking photo, which does, as you always hope your poems will, show an unexpected perspective or a glimpse of reassurance in the ultimately unaccompanied journey we all make. You could be seeing a blonde model from Russia wearing a lot of makeup and a little bit of fur, or some photographer's girlfriend trying out sultry poses on pianos, or cheery moves around office furniture, or a family from Germany in blue jeans and white singlets holding their blue paint rollers against a white wall half-painted blue forever. This will particularly matter every time you look at the stack of unsold books in your cupboard, or the discreet piles self-consciously pasted poetry readings, or the as-new copies resting amongst dog-eared and coffee-stained magazines in your children's lodgings, or at those 3 still volumes in the poetry section of the local bookshop. But most especially when you look across at the ones lying on your lover's bedside table, as if he were going to read a poem from them every night of his life. Purchase your selected image using the online micropayment system. Step 2. The true advantage not mentioned thus far is that if you have completed step 1, the image you purchase will be accompanied by a title you could use. It might mean that your book will bear a slightly prosaic title, such as Fashion Model with Strong Blue Eye Makeup Posing on Grand Piano, or Sweet Attractive Businesswoman Talking on the Phone and Using Virtual Keyboard, or Happy Young Family with Little Son Painting the Wall. Regardless, there will be a beautiful synchronicity between your cover and your title. Step 3. Write 70 pages of excellent poetry. Of course, you could consider including some lesser poems which will need some editorial input, thus allowing the soliciting editor scope to exert a sense of superiority. Step 4. Submit your poetry manuscript to your publisher. In spite of the opening caveat, it is recommended that when dealing with publishers, you submit in the reverse order from those outlined in these guidelines. The other poem I thought I would read, particularly as thanks to David for all his work and commitment, is Matricaria Camilla. Now, I went to Monash University in the south of this country and I learnt a lot of things about the world that had nothing much to do with the curriculum. This is one of them. But I also remember in one of those exchanges between David as my publisher and myself, he wrote back and said something, there's 2 photos in everyone's book, and he had been doing a bit of work on the stray hairs, he said, and I wrote back and said, do you mean the grey hairs? And he said, oh, it's all the same to the Vogue artiste. So this poem's for the Vogue artiste. I first learnt about chamomile at university. I learnt that you could lighten your hair with it. We all tried to be blonde, steeping the chamomile, leaving this tea in our hair until it dried brunette. When I lived a busier life, I heard that chamomile makes a perfect lawn, soft, scented, contained. I pictured my children rolling on the leafy green, pictured myself sprawled, never mowing again. When I planted the lawn, it was soon patched with couch. Kikuyu wormed its way through. Dandelion and chickweed popped up, capeweed smothered it. The children sat on this eclectic grassland, threading daisy chains. Years later, I learnt chamomile soothes nerves. Each day now, I steep flowers in boiling water and sip slowly. My hair is lightening. If only I had been told at university that I needed to drink the mixture. David mentioned that I work as a funeral director and celebrant. I do write a lot of poems from that experience, and there is one section devoted to that. But I probably write as many poems about my own mortality as anybody else's. This poem is called Short Life, Long Death. Too much time hurtling by, crying wolf, way too shy, wasted too many early years, harbouring too many needless fears, going slow, holding back, living like I was on Prozac, feeling like I had to fit in, not so happy in my kind of skin. But something shifted. I started to feel how it could be without the weight of a pseudo-me. Living in that disguise, a compromise I came to despise. Remorse and regret are not my scene. Didn't want to be, or could have been. Got rid of phrases like would, should, maybe, not yet. Acquired a more apt word set. You bet, thought this is the only life I get. Started to make the most of it. This required a major refit. Adapted a can-do attitude and gave myself some latitude. Began to think outside the square, living life on a wing and a prayer, delighted in spontaneity, hitchhiked from this country to every place I wanted to be, danced my heart out wherever I went, hell-bent on living a life well spent, discovered the freedom of the odd free fall, twirling, whirling, risking all to acquire the confidence capital. When I see a break, I shoot that space. This is the only time and place where I get to call the race. So when death stops for me, I'll be ready to turn the page. I will not fight the rest I need or rage against the dying of the light. The time will be right for others to find their creed, take a lead, seek their space, while I move from this vibrant place into the long quiet. Thank you.